Recently, LCTV caught up with artist Jamie Wyeth at the Brandywine River Museum of Art. What follows are excerpts from his press conference at his recent retrospective at the museum.
A big article in a thing called Kentiana or something. A rather serious man. He's the head of the museum on the West Coast, the Fine Art Museum. And he's a great sort of studier of Rockwell Kent. And he felt I'd done him a disservice by putting this thing in the painting, because it's reopened the very sort of terrible part of Kent's life.
But you weren't thinking about that when you obviously painted it.
And in fact, the reality is Kent wasn't on the island when she went off the cliff, but it never was resolved. And it was during when all the communist thing happened. So everybody hated Kent at the time, so they just accused him, but he wasn't there.
It's funny how this island gossip still survives, I guess.
It's like a small town.
Yeah.
And Rockwell Kent was a big figure. So
You live in his house, or you didn't?
I live in his house, yeah. And I've collected his paintings. And when I went to Russia with the big exhibition, Three Generations, the Soviets at that time took me around, and the only American painter hung in the Soviet Union was Rockwell Kent.
Really? Oh,
And they took me in a room in the Pushkin, and here were 25 paintings of Mohegan Island.
Really? Oh.
That studio always has had such an amazing effect on me. I mean, when, as a child, I spent days up in the studio, and at that time, it was full of a lot of his illustrations, and as if he walked out the day before. And so, here were all these costumes and illustrations, Robin Hood and whatnot. And then I go back to our home, which was my father's studio, and he'd be painting a dead bird or something, which wasn't very interesting. It's actually the great thing about that studio, it still looks exactly as it was.
That's neat, yeah, 1945. I thought it was interesting that you also titled it, or you thought of it as a children's illustrator, because of course that's the last thing he'd want to be.
Well, exactly. But in fact, I think his greatest work are his children's illustrations.
Yeah, that probably, it brought so much joy to people, too. So he probably didn't
Well, they're
realize that.
amazing paintings, I think, and you look at them, he knew they were being reproduced this large. Why did he do them huge? Because they jump out of the page. Years ago, the New York Public Library, which owns all the Robin Hoods and all the David Balfour, I think, was kidnapped. Finally, they decided these were important paintings. They had them hung in the children's part of the library. So and we helped them restore them and so forth. So then they had sort of an opening. I was probably in my 30s or something. And I was standing there, and the paintings looked great, and this woman wheeled up to me in a wheelchair, and she grabbed my hand and said, "Oh, Mr. Wyeth, I am so thrilled to meet you. I grew up on your illustrations of David Balfour." So I thank her very much. Well, he was, like a brother to me. We sort of grew up together, and this actually, I called it draft day because he got his draft notice shortly after we finished this. And the paintings had an interesting evolution. It's become sort of iconic for the whole Vietnam thing and whatnot. And in fact, it was a reality with Lynch, and he ended up being rejected from the military. Because I hadn't really lived in New York, and I met him, was fascinated by him, and so moved and spent a couple years working with him, and it had, I think, a big effect on me. He was a fascinating person, very childlike, and we spent most of our time at toy stores, and not the sort of Warhol that but.
I wondered if your period of work there, and it was sort of messy, but you would do things on cardboard and other stuff. And
I think it came a lot from that.
Because of that, because it was like, artists not too precious. You can't create precious artwork, and he would just like, destroy something or give it away.
Yes.
And,
and that resonated with me, and it was. And I think he thought I was peculiar because he didn't paint. He did silkscreen and whatnot. And he kind of liked the smell of oil paint in his factory. I was kind of an oddity there, as strange as ultraviolet or something.
So you both thought each other was weird. It was a perfect relationship.
Yeah, I mean, Andy always said I was more strange than he was. No, it's sort of a very moving thing for me, and you know, in Boston I said how they're ghosts with my grandfather had been born in Needham and whatnot, but the Brandywine is like the House of Seven Gables. I mean, there are an awful lot of ghosts running around here. Well, it's pretty awful for me, you know, and I'm not being cute about it. I just don't. It's, I'm interested in what I'm working on now, and I look at these things as sort of obsessions that I was wrapped up in, and they seem so right at the time, legitimate, and now they look very peculiar.
Well, you can see progression though, can't you? Or...
There is, yeah. I haven't really seen the show. I mean, I think it's quite differently hung than Boston.
Yeah.
It's more, it looks chronological, isn't it? More chronological?
The rooms that you're in right now are the most chronological. They begin with the early works in New York and the Nurea pieces.
Right.
But when you go upstairs, there's no right or wrong way to enter, and that's
Okay.
a little different.
Yeah.
One side of the gallery has Chatsford, one side has Maine, and you'll see we've kind of done a unique separation of the more recent
Great.
works. And you can walk through it freely and really pick up from either end.
Walking with Wyeth.